Key Women Educators, Delta Kappa Gamma. Our mission statement is leading women educators, impacting education worldwide. One of our purposes, and one that we celebrate this evening, is to initiate, endorse, and support desirable legislation or other suitable endeavors in the interests of education and of women educators. With interest in education, we present to you this evening a panel of educators and those interested in education with the purpose of holding a conversation about critical state educational issues. All state legislative candidates, state senators and representatives have been invited. Some have scheduling conflicts and are unable to be with us this evening. We appreciate the support of our local school board and superintendent, Dr. Whitaker, in making this evening possible. The questions for this evening have been submitted by members of the public. Please silence your cell phones and let's agree that our discussion this evening merits civility and respect of each other and our invited panel members. Please be attentive to the questions and the answers so that all audience members can hear clearly. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions. And if additional questions arise, please feel free to use a note card to write your questions and place it on the counter over there next to with the note cards. Our moderator for this evening's panel is also the chair of the Charlotte County School Board, Andrea Messina. Andrea Messina was elected to the Charlotte County School Board in 2000 and re-elected in 2004 and 2008. She is currently serving as chairman for the 5th time. Andrea has a long history of involvement in Charlotte County and the region, including activities with local chambers of commerce, economic development, Enterprise Charlotte Foundation, and Southwestern Florida Regional Planning Council, and others. She has been a mentor to teens in the Take Stock in Children program since 2001. In 2007, the Sarasota Herald-Tribune newspaper picked Andrea as one of the 7 to watch in '07 due to her leadership in education. She also serves on the board of directors for the Florida High School Athletic Association. Andrea has testified in Tallahassee before the Legislative Committee on Intergovernmental Relations on the topic of issues related to natural disaster preparedness and represented all school board members across the nation since 2006, when she was asked to serve as a single school board member on the Aspen Institute's Commission on No Child Left Behind. It was in this role that she participated in lawmaking and governance on federal level and testified in Washington, D.C. before the House Congressional Committee on Education. Recently, Ms. Messina has accepted a position with the Florida Association of School Boards to train new school board members throughout the state in all aspects of successful school board membership. Her ultimate goal is to ensure that board members' decisions target student achievement. We are honored that Andrea Messina has answered our request to moderate this evening's conversation about education. She will introduce the other panel members. Andrea?
Thank you. First, I want to thank all of you for coming out here tonight. This is the first annual event of the conversation on education, and they hope to repeat it next year and the coming year, so this kind of a turnout is really encouraging, both for, I know, the organization that is organizing this, and also for those of us who care about education in Charlotte County. I want to introduce the members of the dais up here. First on your left is Dr. Doug Whitaker. He's currently serving as the superintendent of schools here in Charlotte County. He's been an educator for the last 38 years as a teacher, elementary and middle school principal, central office administrator, and now as a superintendent. He's been a trainer for the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, interactive management, facilitative leadership, and leading at the speed of trust. He's also served as an adjunct professor for several universities, including National Louis University, University of South Florida, Barry University, Nova Southeastern University. He's been a consultant to textbook companies and has several articles published in professional journals. In his spare time, he enjoys flying with the Sundowners Club, playing golf, and traveling. He's married to his wife, Susan, for 42 years, has 2 married daughters, 7 grandchildren, and is building a home in Punta Gorda. To your right, yes, we have Paula House. She's a candidate on your November ballot for the position of State Senate District 26. Whenever somebody who's up here is elected in a partisan election, I will also end areas of Port Charlotte. She attended the University of Illinois and earned her Bachelor of Science in Communications. She also has her law degree from the University of Maine. She's also attended University of Southern Maine and received her mediation certification in Education Curriculum for State Teacher Certification and Mediation Certification. University of South Florida Mediation Certification. She has 2 children and 1 grandchild. She lives in Lake Placid. She's a former public school teacher and state prosecutor. She has operated a private law practice for over 20 years, including mediation and alternative dispute resolution services, and she's the former chairperson of the Highlands County Democratic Party. So please help me welcome candidate Paula House. Moving down the dais, we also have a candidate for this time State Senate District 30, Debbie Jordan. She is also a Democrat. She will, if elected, she'll represent areas in Punta Gorda, Fort Myers, Cape Coral, and Sanibel. For over 18 years, Ms. Jordan has served as president of the Lee and Charlotte chapter of the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, its state board, and its executive committee. She's been integral in the volunteer-based River and Blues Fest in Fort Myers. Its mission is to raise funds and feed the hungry in the community. She volunteers with several groups, including the March of Dimes, her church, and community outreach programs. She was a fundraiser for a special program with the NAACP, involved in the ProStart programs with some high schools for the hospitality industry. She's a member of the Democratic Executive Committee, Democratic Women's Caucus, and the Greater Fort Myers Democratic Clubs. She's a member of the Kiwanis of Cape Coral, serves on the advisory board for hospitality for Edison State College, and is a 40-year resident of Southwest Florida, single mother of 4 and grandmother of 11. So please help me welcome candidate Debbie Jordan. Moving down, we have our state representative for Charlotte County, Ken Robertson. Due to redistricting, Ken is our only state representative hereafter, so he represents all of the geographical boundary contained within Charlotte County. Used to be we had 3, it was kind of parsed out, but Ken is now our sole representative. We really appreciate you being out here tonight. His district is now number 75. Ken Robertson is a native Floridian, born in Bradenton. I'm not going to give the year, Ken, but it is written here. He's a product of Florida's public school system, graduating from Manatee High School 1961, so you can do the math on that. He graduated from Manatee Junior College and ultimately the Dallas Institute of Mortuary Science. Ken has owned and operated his own business, serving the citizens of Charlotte, Sarasota, and Lee County for 32 years. In his spare time, Ken enjoys reading, horticulture, wildlife, and environmental protection, fishing, football, and spending time with his family. He has 2 grown sons and 6 grandchildren. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you.
On the end, we have Mr. Lee Swift, who is completing his 18th year of service on the Charlotte County School Board. He's served in numerous leadership positions in the county during his 30 years that he's lived here. In addition, he's held numerous offices and committee leadership posts with the Florida School Boards Association, currently serving as the immediate past president. He also serves on the boards of the Florida School Board Insurance Trust, the Florida Educators Purchasing Consortium, and he serves as the secretary of the Florida Retired School Employee Benefit Program. His wife, Ann, recently retired after teaching for 21 years at Sally Jones, and his daughter, Whitney, teaches at Charlotte High. Welcome, Mr. Swift. So I want to review with you quickly what the agenda for tonight's program is. We're going to have a very short overview of education in Florida that's going to be provided by our superintendent, Dr. Whitaker. Following that, we're going to have a first round of questions. As was mentioned earlier, the questions were previously submitted by the public. However, if you happen to have a pressing question, there are index cards right up here. Terry Whitaker has them. You can feel free to write your question down, and she'll bring it up to me. Many of the questions, I have to tell you, were of similar theme, so we kind of grouped them together. We've tried to maybe reword some that might have too much specificity that a candidate for Senate might not necessarily have the information on. It might be more of a DOE-specific content question. After the first round of questions, Mr. Swift is going to be giving us an overview of some of the constitutional amendments that you'll find on the ballot in November that will be affecting education. Then we'll have our second round of questions, and at the end we'll have some closing remarks. So that's what you can expect for tonight. So Dr. Whitaker, if you could please give us an overview of education in Florida to get this started. We'd appreciate it.
I would be glad to. I've condensed the full semester course into 3 hours. So, education in Florida. In a word, it's about change. Florida is undergoing a huge amount of change in education. When I moved to this state 39 years ago from Indiana, Florida had the reputation of having a very ineffective, very weak, poor school system. I will tell you in my experience in my first few years that I was here, that while I found the teachers and administrators I worked with to be delightful people, there was not a lot of rigor in the curriculum. That began to change dramatically in the 1980s, accelerated through the 90s, and has shifted into fifth gear now at the turn of the century. According to Education Week, which is our profession's New York Times, Florida has moved in the last 5 years from a ranking that they calculate using over 20 different indicators of education, everything from rigor in curriculum to accountability to performance on tests to funding across the board. But Florida moved from 37th to 5th a year ago. It has dropped to 9th. But Florida has made huge progress. The rate of Hispanic students, the percent of our Hispanic students that pass the higher level tests, ACT and SAT, are the highest in the country. We have made the greatest gain on the international assessments. Our results are not where they need to be, but we're improving more rapidly than any of the other 49 states on the NAEP. And while not all of us agree as to the detail of change in Florida, most educators agree with our legislators that Florida needs to dramatically improve. Even though we have improved, we need to dramatically improve education in this state. And we encourage, as professionals, the lively debate that needs to ensue around how do we do that here in this state. So we are improving. We do have issues, clearly. Not high enough. We do not have a graduation rate that's high enough. We do not have nearly as many students who reading where they need to be reading. But interestingly, the rate of high school students reading at high levels is higher than it's ever been. It is not going backwards. It's higher than it's ever been. The issue we face is that the need is outstripping the gain. The demands, the reading demands on our graduates is going up at a faster rate than our improvement is going, if that makes sense to you. We have seen gains, we are improving, but in between 1955 and today, we have moved from a predominantly unskilled labor market. 65% of all jobs in 1955 were unskilled labor. About 50% of our high school students graduated in 1955. The rest went into, actually, well-paying jobs in mills, car factories. Those jobs either don't exist or have changed. Ford Motor Company last year, in hiring their assembly line workers, 50% of their assembly line workers were required to have college degrees. In 1955, as long as you had finished 8th grade, you could get a job. The entry-level reading requirement for a blue-collar worker now in the United States is at the same level as that of a white-collar worker. It's at what we reference as a Lexile reading scale score of 1200, which is a college entry reading level. That is what is now required for our blue-collar workers. Why? Technology. So it's not that Florida is not improving. Our issue is we aren't improving fast enough to keep up with the demands of a technological information age world, and that's our struggle right now.
Thank you. You have a minute and a half left if you're interested.
I'll defer.
Okay. The way we're going to work these questions, first off, we do have 2 candidates here. All candidates were invited. Some of them were unable to attend. But in order to give you an opportunity to meet those people whose names are still on the ballot, we're going to address the questions first to our candidates. Then Mr. Robertson, who's up in Tallahassee, if he'd like to weigh in, we're going to refer to him. There may be a time when we want to know, because Mr. Robertson, how many years have you been in your position now?
4.
So he's been in for 4 years already up in Tallahassee representing us. So there may be some things that he can shed some light on from the Tallahassee side. There might be some things that Dr. Whitaker can weigh in on from the Charlotte County side. So we'll kind of have bookends for detailed anecdotal information along the way. So ladies, educationally speaking, are we making progress in Florida? Why or why not? And how do you suggest that progress should be measured or evaluated? And I'll let either one of you go first, and then we'll take turns from that.
I'd be glad to go first. It was a 3-part question, so if I leave out a part, there is a lot of change in Florida, and a lot of it I think is going in the wrong direction. I think that your limitations on class size constitutional amendment accounts for a lot of the gains that have been seen that were discussed here in terms of the summary of Florida education. But I think the current structure that involves charter school and disruption of the teacher-employer bargaining situation is really not going to move our educational system ahead. Charter schools basically are, at this point, bleeding our public schools. So we have our public school here, and we start a charter school here. We take students and we take dollars from the public school, and it goes over to the charter school. The charter school is a private school. I know it's called a public school, but it is a private school. It is not within public control. You know, you have a school board, an elected school board. Charter schools are not like that. They have a sponsor, and the sponsor is responsible for making sure that that charter school complies with all the laws and rules that are applicable to those schools. But what happens is that they take the money, they follow the students, so they take the money from the students, and the money is for the year. So if that charter school goes under or that charter school fails during the year, you have students who do not have an educational institute to go to and then must be sent back to the public school, and that money does not follow that student. It's gone into the charter school. I think there are lots of small problems like that, big problems, if the charter school does not make a go of it, that really make this the wrong direction for Florida. I think we need to strengthen our public schools, work with what we have, and not splinter our school system and or privatize it, which is really, I think, part of the direction that the charter school movement is taking. And that is, certainly we saw the parent trigger legislation last year that really seemed to be spiteful and mean to an institution that has been the centerpiece of our community for centuries at this point in time. So I'm very, very concerned about that in Florida, and I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see our public dollars stay in public infrastructure and public education. I don't know if you know, but $55 million was put aside by the state legislature, but that money is to go only to infrastructure for charter schools, not for our public schools. No dollars were set aside to enhance and to keep up repairs in our public schools. And I just cannot justify that. I don't know how that was justified. I wasn't there when it happened.
Thank you. Ms. Jordan?
Okay, the question was, do I believe that we're making progress? I believe that we have the ability to make that progress. I believe that Tallahassee does not want that to take place. With stopping the parent trigger bill, for example, Rick Scott taking away $1.4 billion and then replacing it back with the $1 billion and patting himself on the back as if he did something. I think that we really need to get back to letting the teachers do their job and teach, because I do believe that everyone has the ability to learn and to move forward, but we just have to make that happen. That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay. Mr. Robertson, I should note that Mr. Robertson does not sit on any education committees. Which committees are you on?
Business, well, about 5 or 6. We have business, consumer affairs, government operations, healthcare access. I've spent a lot in business and consumer committees, and also on healthcare issues, which is a big part of Florida's budget.
Right. And so then, do you think that we're making progress in Florida? And if so, why, and how do we measure it?
Well, I really do. I mean, a lot of numbers get thrown around, and repeated, and a lot of them aren't true. I mean, we hear that, we're 32nd and or 50th in funding and performance, and but I think we're somewhere in the middle on funding, out throughout the country. But the big news is we're in the top 10 in student achievement. So I think we are making progress. And a few years ago, according to Education Magazine, we were 5th. And I don't necessarily think there's any correlation between the amount of funding that we do. I mean, if you look at Chicago, which is the worst in achievement, they spend $13,000 per year on students, where we spend approximately $6,500. I think we are making progress, and our education. It's just a question of how we get there. There's a lot of challenges. We've been faced the last few years since I've been up there with dramatic budget deficits facing Florida with the downturn in the economy. Most of our revenue from Florida comes from sales tax, and with the economy going down, the sales tax revenue went down, and so we had significant challenges. It was mentioned about the education funding. We did restore $1 billion. It's true that it was taken out, but the good news is it was put back, and I think the governor is on the right track right now, listening to everyone and trying to continue the progress that we're making. But we have had a lot of challenges with the budget.
Thank you. This time, Ms. Jordan, we're going to have you go first, if that's okay.
Sure.
What do you feel is the appropriate role of the State Department of Education, and what do you feel is the appropriate role of the U.S. Department of Education?
Okay, very simple. I think that we have a local school board, such as yourself, and we need to keep it local. We need to keep the state out of the local education system. That's what I believe. We need to make sure that the money is coming down, and each individual school district knows the schools that need to have those funds. And I believe that's where we need to zone in on the schools that need more money and make sure that they're getting them, the public schools, and keeping the money in the public schools.
Thank you. Ms. House?
When I was teaching in 1978, the federal government was very involved in special education, and sharing what I think is a unique opportunity of the federal government to really look at all the research and to identify weaknesses in the education systems, and then to set up incentives for states to participate. And that's exactly what happened with special ed. I happen to have been working in gifted and talented areas, and for many years, gifted and talented students were lumped in with special ed students. Some of them had dyslexia or they had other problems, but they were in many cases brilliant, and yet they were different. And I learned that people who are very, very bright have as much of a difficult time functioning in the public school setting in a normal classroom as do people who are intellectually challenged, because they're on either side of it. Now, the federal government was really instrumental in setting up incentives for schools to set up various special ed classrooms, Title IX, very important, giving women equal opportunity in public education. So they just have a cleaner, more scalpel-like view, I think, of education than sometimes states do. And states are dealing with a lot of variety, a lot of different problems, very specific problems, and sometimes they need a bigger overview to come in and say, hey, look, this is what the research says. If you do this for your school, we will help you set this program up, and it's going to be good for you. And so I was a convert. I was working in a very small rural school, and a lot of people on the school board said, well, what I had for education was good enough for me, and it's good enough for my kids. And we really needed a different view of that, and the federal government helped us get that view. So I'm really in favor of a partnership, and anything that can help kids learn better, anything that can bring more money into our schools and help us provide services, I'm in favor of.
Representative Robertson?
Well, I think the question was, how do you feel about the role of the State Department of Education? I really believe that they should exist as kind of a support role to the local school districts. We have elected school board members and all of the school districts throughout the Florida 67 counties, and the State Department of Education really should function in a support role to those districts. And now we have 67 counties, so there has to be some general oversight of the whole system, but that's my belief, that they should be more in a support role.
Thank you. And Dr. Whitaker?
I'll be brief. The federal government's role should be basically on research, be a data collection point for the best studies around the country, and be a clearinghouse for that information so the states can pull that information down. They have a unique view. They also have a role, and continue this role, to look out for the poor and for the special needs kids. They have done a good job with Head Start and basically with Title I. Both of those programs have been fairly well funded. Head Start has, if you look at the longitudinal research, for every dollar in Head Start, it has saved about $7 in the cost of incarceration and fixing people. You can see the studies, go online, the data's there. The issue with the federal government right now is they have now passed a whole lot of laws dealing with our special needs children, but only funded it at about a 35% level. They have passed the rest of that cost on to the state of Florida and the other states, and that's a hefty bill. State-wise, Ken knows what I'm going to say. He could probably say it for me. This is our Florida law book. You can see the size of the print.
No pictures.
No pictures. Florida is the most regulated state in the country. According to Education Week magazine, we have more laws. If you went line by line in here, there's over 5,400 shalls, musts, and wills. Not done with malice, done with good intent, but it's time to deregulate There are things that need to be regulated, and there are things that don't need to be deregulated. Conversation with the governor a week ago, he has established a committee. One of our charges is to try to eliminate some of the red tape, some of the regulation. So that's what we're about. Florida DOE has changed, unfortunately, from a support organization to a compliance regulation organization. And again, we as district leaders are trying to work with our legislators to bring the old DOE back so they will support us and not tell us how to do our jobs.
Thank you. The implementation of the Student Success Act, which is commonly referred to as Senate Bill 736, has been very challenging for Florida districts. What do you see as the most significant issues surrounding the implementation of the Student Success Act? Ms. House?
I think the hot button issue is basing student pay and retention on student performance. They call this the Student Success Act, but it really is the Teacher Success Act. So, how do you fairly ascribe a child's progress in the classroom to teacher effort, parent effort, curriculum, testing strategy, all the variables that go into whether that child learns or not, including genetics, even classroom availability, classroom structure. What does the classroom look like? Are they in a trailer? Are they in a, with a lot of other people? For a while, I know that they thought it was a good idea to have whole schools all together with just dividers, and there's lots of noise, and some students can't achieve in noise. And education is always an experiment. I mean, because as has been said here, the playing field is always changing. What we need to know to function in society, what we need to know to fit into technology, what we need to know to do well in our socioeconomic system is always changing, because that's always changing. So to the extent that they have tied teachers' pay and teacher retention to student performance, I believe that's about 50%. Is that correct? I have some real problems with them using only standardized tests, because back in 1980 it was well known that standardized tests mostly test how well you take standardized tests, and may not be a really good measure of how well that child has mastered certain skills. I believe a lot of the colleges stopped using ACT and SAT tests as significant measures in terms of their acceptance policies. Some of the best schools did that. And so I think Florida ought not go backwards. And yeah, it may be something that laymen and legislators who are not educators can understand, because it's a number. But I really don't think it creates any fairness for the teachers. It also removes their ability to negotiate in the workplace for their own betterment and for their own position in terms of pay, salary, and that sort of thing. And I think that that's wrong. I think that's wrong to disable them from that kind of control. And really, I could go on, but I'll let somebody else talk.
Ms. Jordan.
Okay, thank you. As far as the way I look at it, it's not a one-size-fits-all. As far as success, how do we measure success? Who are the people that say what success is? I know, for instance, I have a child who I believe is, she's very talented, she's very intelligent, but she cannot take a test if her life depended on it, because she doesn't have that mechanism in her. Is she successful? Absolutely. In my eyes, she is, and in most other people's eyes. But it's how do we measure that? And how do we measure the teachers for that? Because the teachers get as frustrated as she gets. And it's just, I don't know how we get to the point where we just allow the teachers to teach and let these children's minds just, build and become somebody. I don't have the answer for that. And I'm not an educator. I'm a parent and a grandparent. So with having as many kids that I do and grandchildren, I will always be in the system. So I see the frustrations that they go through, as well as the teachers and the administrators.
Thank you. Representative Robertson.
Well, the fact of the matter is we are moving across the country to performance pay. If you look at Wisconsin and even in Chicago, where you've got a Democratic mayor, and in Wisconsin you've got a Republican governor, we're moving to performance pay to show progress, with the students. And Florida's identified that right now as 50% is based on performance pay. And teacher pay won't be necessarily tied to test scores, but it probably on average is like 3-year average to show that there's progress, with the students being made. And the goal of the teacher evaluation is to make sure that we have well-qualified teachers and the kids are learning and they don't have to go back for remediation as they move forward. Does it need to be tweaked? Probably yes, but there is going to be some form of performance pay as we move forward. Florida applied for the Race to Top money, which came from the federal government, and that required, there was a requirement in that federal money to have performance pay in Florida, and that was one of the reasons we did it.
Thank you. Dr. Whitaker, could you give us an idea of what the significant implications have been here in Charlotte County on working to implement this piece of legislation?
As we look at the key reforms that came out of 736, as well as the other dynamics, the changes that are occurring right now across the nation and specifically in Florida, in the last 3 years, we have started to work on the implementation of, first, the next generation of Sunshine State standards. What are our kids going to learn and know? As we transition, with only being in place for 2 or 3 years, we transition into the Common Core that is shared with 26 other states, primarily east of the Mississippi. We're fundamentally changing what teachers will teach. And I believe as an educator, it's a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. We've been trying to teach way too much stuff down through the years. This narrows and prioritizes what our kids learn and actually brings us into alignment with the curricula that is being taught in Denmark, Finland, Singapore, Korea, China, India, around the world, those countries that are outscoring us on the international tests. So this is a huge initiative. We're changing the curriculum, K through 12, and that reaches its culmination in 2014-15. At the same time, with Race to the Top and Senate Bill 736, we're changing our teacher performance appraisal system, how we judge how well teachers teach in their classroom. If that was all we had to do, that would be a monumental task. It would take, I think, to do it right, it would take a good 3 years to design it, and a year to design it, a year to pilot it, try it out, work out the kinks, and then another year to put it out full-blown, get everybody used to it, and then you pull the cord and say, this is it, this is the new appraisal system. A 3 to 4 year process. We have basically 2 years, and if it wasn't for the courts intervening, we only would have had 1 year to design and implement a new teacher appraisal system and hold teachers accountable for having to teach in new and different ways. At the same time, the state is also moving us away from FCAT into a different kind of assessment that will be aligned with the new Common Core. It's a good thing. FCAT, it's time for it to go. The new assessments will measure more depth of knowledge. They will be more challenging for kids. Students will have to think more. But again, that requires a huge shift. All three of these are going on simultaneously. And during that time, because of the economy, Charlotte County Schools has lost $41 million of revenue in the last 5 years. Our ability to provide the kind of training our teachers need is gone. Money isn't there. Eventually it will come back. The difficulty we face right now is trying to get all of this work done with fewer people and with less time to train our teachers on a new curriculum, new methodology, and a new way of assessing students, which means they teach differently. And all of these things come together in the 2014-15 school year, which is the first year that our teachers will be paid for their performance based on a new curriculum, new teaching methodology, and a new assessment. And what we're saying as leaders to our legislators and to our governor and to our state board is it's too much, too fast. We've got a fire hose up to our mouth and we're trying to drink. We're asking our state legislators and specifically our governor to push that teacher performance pay date to a later date. Let us get the new curriculum in place. Let us get the new assessments in place. Let us get the new teacher appraisal system in place. Let's get everything lined up, and then let's talk about the best way to do teacher performance pay. And then with this, I'm done. One size doesn't fit all, and I'm very concerned that there's only one path right now that this state is going down on how performance pay will look, and I think it's going to crash and burn. I believe that we can move off of our old way of paying, which there's very few people that really support just the old way. You spend another year in education, you get paid more money. There are other options out there. I would like to see this state let the districts try 4 or 5 different forms, different approaches to performance pay, collect the data, and see what works. There are places that have made this work. Austin, Texas, voluntarily went down the road of performance pay for teachers, but they built the system with the teachers sitting in the room saying, yeah, we can do this and we can do that. They worked synergistically, and they have created a successful system of performance pay based in part on how the students do. So there's a way to get there, but I am very concerned that at the rate that the law calls for the implementation is going to lead us into a disaster in 2 short years. We've got to spread this out.
Thank you. For the next 10, 12 minutes, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to ask Mr. Swift, who is the former president of the Florida School Boards Association, to talk to us about some of the constitutional amendments that you'll be asked to vote on in November. So, Mr. Swift?
Thank you, Ms. Messina. First, I think you all got the handout on the 3 amendments. It gives a quick summary of each one. I'm going to just briefly talk about Amendments 3 and 4, and then spend most of my time on Amendment 8. Amendment 3 is a limitation on the growth of state government and state revenue. It's patterned after a series of bills that have been attempted to be passed around the country, something called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Sounds like a wonderful idea. It's been attempted in 21 states. It's been voted down in 20, and it's been an extreme disaster in the 21st, Colorado. They're trying to, they suspended the implementation of the law for a couple of years because they weren't able to deliver the basic services. it's a little bit of a misnomer in that it says it's going to benefit education. It does not really. It will buy down the local effort. That's Amendment 8 that's on the screen. It will buy down the local effort. So your local taxes would drop, but it wouldn't provide any additional, or would not provide any additional money for education, so it would not be an enhancement. Amendment 4 on property tax limitations, property value declines, is really a modification to the Save Our Homes Amendment, where your homestead assessed value can only increase by a certain percentage. There's a little bit of a glitch in that if you fall, if the market value of the property goes up enough, it can decrease in a year, and yet because you're behind that significantly, your property taxes would go up. This would suspend that in those kinds of situations. The latest information I had, this may be the only amendment so far that's polling in as if it will pass. The next and the potentially most devastating amendment to public education is Amendment 8, which on the ballot is entitled Freedom of Religion. First and foremost, it has absolutely nothing to do with freedom of religion. As you will see on the screen, the Florida Constitution says on religious freedom, there shall be no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting or penalizing the free exercise thereof. That's the standard establishment and free exercise clauses. The U.S. Constitution says virtually the same thing. This is the way you will see the amendment on the ballot, with the exception of the colors. The underlined portion is the addition to the amendment, and the strike through is the portion that's going to be eliminated. To look at it in a little more detail, it's going to add a clause that says, except to the extent required by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, neither the government nor any agent of the government may deny to any individual or entity the benefits of any program, funding, or other support on the basis of religious identity or belief. The clause that is being eliminated says no revenue of the state or any political subdivision or agency thereof shall ever be taken from the public treasury directly or indirectly in aid of any church, sect, or religious denomination. Now, the history of this goes back to the Virginia Act for Religious Freedom of 1786, which was authored by Thomas Jefferson. It later appears in the Virginia Constitution. It supports the no aid provision, which is what is being dealt with in this amendment. Again, nothing to do with religious freedom. And Thomas Jefferson, God love him, was a wordy son of a gun. And this is a quote from that act. It says that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves is sinful and tyrannical. That even the forcing him to support this or that teacher of his own religious persuasion is denying him the comfortable liberty of giving his contributions to the particular pastor whose morals he would make his pattern. It continues later on in the act, in the actual recommendation, be it therefore enacted by the General Assembly that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise offer on account of his religious opinions or belief. That all men shall be free to profess by any argument to maintain their opinions of matters of religion. There are 38 states that have wording in their constitutions similar to the Religious Freedom Amendment, the no aid provision. 17 of those states adopted that before there was the suggestion of something called the Blaine Amendment in the 1870s. President Grant actually was the one to recommend it. And that was the proposed amendment to the Constitution, which never passed. The Blaine Amendment, named after James G. Blaine, representative from the state of Maine. At the time, it was portrayed somewhat as an anti-Catholic measure. And the people who are opposed to this amendment are using that a little bit as the reason for it to be eliminated. But James G. Blaine was an Irish Presbyterian who was married to an Irish Catholic. And according to the mores of that time, if you had, in a situation like that, the daughters would be raised in the mother's religion, the sons would be raised in the father's religion, and they had one of each. So he certainly was not anti-Catholic, and in the history in Florida, this was added to the Florida Constitution in 1885. There was no mention in any of the papers historically or in any of the debate of anti-Catholicism being recommended as a reason for supporting this. The amendment has been in the Constitution for 127 years. The Constitution has been rewritten on several occasions. This amendment has not had, or clause has not had, a word changed in it in that entire period of time. What this is really about is money. This would allow the expansion of voucher programs, and not only voucher programs. The amendment, as it's worded, the clause to be added, it says neither the government nor any agent of the government may deny to any individual the benefits of any program funding. What really that means is it requires the state to fund that item, even if it's something that wouldn't be funded now. The only thing that I can say, and I'm not specifying a bias against anybody, but if you can imagine the most abhorrent doctrine you can think of, and what might be to you would be different from the person next to you or to me, your tax money could go to support the religious education of those students. The practical effect in this state would be there are currently, and this information, although I gleaned it from something called the Florida Center for Fiscal and Economic Policy and the Florida School Boards Association, was essentially derived from the Department of Education's website. There are about 270,000 students currently in private school in the state of Florida, many of them in religious schools. You take out the number who are currently on voucher programs of one sort or another, and you end up with, that's 70,000, you end up with 200,000. If you multiply that by something called the base student allocation, which is a fundamental part of the Florida education finance formula, that comes up to $716,600,000 to provide vouchers to the students already in private school who are not currently eligible for them because of the amendment or the clause as it exists. If you take that up to the total funding per student of $6,375, that goes up to $1.275 billion per year. If you multiply that up to a 5-year number, and not allowing for any changes in number of students getting vouchers or not changing any of the funding formula, that goes to $3.58 to $6.58 billion. And remember, this is in a state right now that is funding students at a level that the last time was this low was 10 years ago. It will break the bank. So some points that everyone should consider when they're evaluating this amendment and their support of this amendment. The no aid provision has been in the Florida Constitution for 127 years. The people of Florida have seen no reason to change it. It preserves the separation of church and state, and it also preserves an education system that has an equal accountability for all. Private schools do not have to administer the FCAT. Private schools do not have to do many of the things that public schools do. The Florida Constitution requires that all public schools, that there be a free and appropriate public education, and that there be an equality of education in the public schools. This would change that. The amendment would also, it will not enhance or change the state's ability to partner with organizations such as religious organizations to deliver certain services. As we all know, there are many hospitals in this state that are operated by different portions of the Catholic Church. There are also Lutheran Ministries offers child protective services and welfare services. So, but that's all done on a competitive basis with other private organizations. But the organization presenting the best program gets the job, and there's no chance for proselytizing for the particular religion. And again, really, this is all about money, has nothing to do with religious freedom. The clause that's being changed does not mention religion once. It's, again, we're trying to, or the Florida School Board Association has taken a position against this amendment. It's taken a position against all three of the amendments that I've talked about, but this one is the one that is potentially the most damaging to public education. The sources for this were FSBA.org is the website of the Florida School Board Association. You can go to that website and get more detailed information on all 11 of the amendments, position papers, particularly on 3 and 4, and on Amendment 8, and also the U.S. Constitution and the Florida Constitution. I was one of several people
30 seconds.
that was a part of a lawsuit to have this removed from the ballot. 6 of the other people, there were 2 rabbis, 2 congregationalist ministers, 1 Presbyterian minister, the president of the Teachers Association, and myself. A lot of this is being promulgated because private school enrollment has dropped significantly because of the economy, and that's where it's going.
Thank you, Mr.
If there are any
Swift.
questions later, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Swift. Next question is specifically for Representative Robertson. Can you help us understand how the lottery money is used?
Well, the lottery money is used to, goes into the proceeds of the lottery, other than for the prizes and for administration, and I forget the exact, but it's about 40% does go into the Florida Education Enhancement Trust Fund. And I tell people all the time, if you want to support education, go buy a lottery ticket, because that's one of the committees that I served on, is Government Operations Committee, and we did oversee the lottery. I've been out to the lottery. I've watched them draw and everything. And now, if you go back when the lottery was first brought into Florida, and I don't think it's, 20 years ago or whenever, I forget the exact date.
80s.
There was some of the education funds did get moved around. So, but the lottery money, the proceeds of the lottery, other than the prizes and the administration, which administration of the lottery is very low, I think it's like 6 or 7%. And the prizes, it does go to the Education Enhancement Trust Fund. I think the number is 41% goes to education.
So no other funds other than education are recipients of those proceeds?
No, they go
beyond the
directly,
administrative
other than
fees?
for prizes and the direct administration of the lottery, it goes in the Florida Education Enhancement Trust Fund.
Thank you. I believe, Ms. Jordan, you're the one to go first this time. The question is, would you please comment on your view of arts and humanities in Florida's public schools?
That's easy. Well, to me, it is definitely a necessity. It allows the children to be well-rounded, and most of my kids are in the arts programs, so I definitely have a very strong feeling about that. And actually, when I was researching, I found that it is mandated in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution that Congress promotes arts and science. So it is in that, it is there, and to me, it's definitely essential to continue that.
Thank you. Ms. House?
We don't want to have our children in a setting where there's no fun and where there's no creativity, and learning is a multidimensional activity. It doesn't just involve the written word, it involves lots of other ways of interacting with our environment, and I think certainly arts is one of those. Humanities are absolutely essential, because what good is it if you have no conscience? That has to be an area of attention. We can't leave that out of our children's education. And what better way to get that than through the humanities?
Thank you. Representative Robertson.
Well, I agree. I think it's part of having a well-rounded student that we continue with arts and music. And interestingly enough, recent studies have shown that students who participate in art and music, they score higher in math. So, I think we need to continue to try to fund that and support those programs where we can.
Thank you. Ms. House, we're going to come back to you as the first responder to this question. What types of education reform should Florida be focused upon?
Well, as I think I said before, I think the voucher system is wrong. I think we really need to redouble our efforts in our public schools. I think our schools need to remain the centerpiece of our communities. I think they draw us together as communities. They help us to know our neighbor. They help us to relate to our neighbor. They help us learn to work together in a civic context and solve problems. The voucher system doesn't do that. It takes those schools out of the community. They are not accountable to the community. There's no school board. So I would like to see, I would like to not have vouchers in the state of Florida.
Ms. Jordan.
Well, I definitely agree with Paula. I think we need to keep our emphasis on the public sector and just go straight forward with that and promote it 100%. Forget the vouchers.
Dr. Whitaker, what types of reforms do you think that Florida should be focused upon?
I really think we need to continue down the road of using a research-based approach to teaching reading and mathematics in particular. I think we need to reform the reform of high-stakes testing. There's a place for accountability and there's a place for standardized tests. I believe we've gone way past what is reasonable. We poke around at wanting to be like Denmark and Finland and Korea and Singapore. And in each of those 4 countries, there is one high-stakes standardized test that's given in high school. Now, there are assessments all along the way. We use assessments. The assessment should be used for monitoring student progress, making changes and shifts in how we're teaching so that we know we're teaching all kids and children are learning at an acceptable rate. But to stop the train and give a big high-stakes multiple choice test, whether it's nationally normed or not, and do that every year, year after year in multiple subjects, I believe is redundant and unnecessary. The pig doesn't get fatter because you weigh it. Again, there's a place for accountability and for reasonable assessments, but we're spending way too much money on testing. I believe we can accomplish the same with less of that. I think Florida also needs to go to a longer school year. The research for 5 decades has been the difference between high-achieving students and low-achieving students is not what they can learn, but how long it takes them to learn. We want to make a difference in our kids' lives. We should have some of our kids in school 200 and 220 days. And that's doable if we set on a plan. We can't throw that switch next year and incur that kind of cost. But if we gradually phased in days over time, it would solve, number one, a teacher pay problem, because our best teachers would be teaching those longer periods of time and making more money, as well as having more time for students. Our teachers need more time to not just to plan, they need more time to work collegially together and have discussions around the data and what it means and what their best practices are. And there's no time for that. We have 3 professional development days a year. American business puts 7, 8, 10% of their money into the development of their employees. And we spend 1% maybe, and we're educators. Shame on us. So I really think there are some real significant changes we can make that would make a difference in student learning. That's what it's about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is going to go first to Ms. Jordan. How should schools be held accountable? And should high-performing schools be rewarded? What measurements should be used and why?
Okay.
Let me go through it again.
Go ahead.
How should schools be held accountable? Mm-hmm. Should high-performing schools be rewarded? How? What measurements would be used and why?
Okay, I do believe that the schools should be accountable for teaching. As far as high-performance schools versus the low-performance schools, I think you have to look at everything. Do they have the same amount of money? Do they have the same type of teachers? Are they in an area? I think everything, really, we need to weigh it all out as far as should they be rewarded and what would that reward be? So to me, if you have a failing school, that's the school we need to go to, and that's the school that we really need to emphasize our time there with those, checking the teachers out. Is there something that they have? Do they have the equipment that is needed to teach these children? Where are these children from? Do they have the support from, from home? So I don't know if I would say, yes, we reward them, because they are better. You have to look at the whole thing, the whole picture.
All right, Ms. Howes, how should Florida schools be accountable? Should high-performing schools be rewarded, and how? What measurements would be used and why?
Well, it was very shocking to me to find out that if your school is doing poorly, we're going to take money from you. That just stood my concept of how I want to run my life and how I would like to see life run on its head. I think if we have high-performing schools, we want to find out what they're doing. Very much like Dr. Whitaker said, let's look at the research. Let's look at the methods that work. And then let's spend some time finding out what those factors are and sharing them with other schools so that we can all be high-performing schools. I think that really the way that it's structured now, this new structure, it's a punishment system, and we all know we don't respond very well to punishments. We respond rather to being given credit for what we're trying to do, and I think in all schools, teachers are trying very hard. Sometimes they don't have the tools, sometimes they don't have the resources to get where they need to go. So I think there are ways to measure performance and ways to measure schools, much like Dr. Whitaker said, not by standardized tests. And we really need to look at that research because it is there. But we have really a dysfunctional system going on here in Florida. We're really, you know, my question is, why aren't our educators speaking out about this? How about, why aren't the educators in our universities speaking out about what the legislature has been doing? Because the research is there that shows that this kind of stuff doesn't work. Why are we doing this? And then I realized, oh yeah, the legislature controls the budgets of all the universities. So how can they really stand up and say, hey guys, we have a delegate of professors here who think what you are doing is totally down the wrong road. I think a lot of the ideas about education that have come into Florida have come from outside of Florida, and they have other agendas attached to them, not necessarily the welfare of Florida students. I think they're cooked up in billionaire boardrooms somewhere in Nevada or Nebraska or wherever the heck they meet out there. And then they're brought here, and it's kind of like a plagiarized term paper. They just kind of bring it in, dark at night, change the heading, and push an agenda that really is not an agenda for Florida, but for something else. And I'm against that something else agenda. I'm in favor of an agenda for Florida students and for Florida teachers.
Representative Robertson.
Well, you know, there does have to be some accountability, but right now the schools currently receive money based on, based on the school grade. And as we've talked about performance pay, and we are moving to some type of performance pay, and I think that money, instead of going to the schools based on their grade, should probably go to the teachers, for the performance pay rather than, to the school based on purely the grade.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and then I'm going to give each of you about a minute and a half for some concluding remarks in case there's something that you wanted us to ask you and we somehow didn't. The final question is, what do you see as the most significant issues surrounding the rollout of the Common Core state standards, and how should the Florida legislature respond to these issues? So what issues do you see surrounding rollout of Common Core state standards, and how should the Florida legislature respond to these issues? Well, I've lost my place. Were you first? No, you were not first this time. We're going to let you go first, Ms. House.
Well, this is, to tell you the truth, the first time that I've heard about the Common Core standards, and I was interested to hear Dr. Whitaker talk about them. So I'm not sure I am prepared to answer this question responsibly. I'm certainly in favor of revising our curriculum to be more effective, and if that's what these Common Core standards are going to do, then I'm in favor of that. In terms of how the legislature should respond, since I don't know what they are, I can't really say one way or another, so I guess I'm going to have to say I need to study up on that question.
Thanks. Ms. Jordan?
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with it as well. I've been speaking to a lot of the teachers, though, and I know that the FCAT, they're very pleased and happy. This is in Lee County, that it's going away, as I am very happy that it's going away, too. That's my ultimate. But as far as the core, they are not really happy with that one either, because it's just another one that's being replaced. So we're phasing out one to put another one in there. And I guess I would really need to see what that testing is, and are we going to teach the children like we're doing right now, where everything is FCAT? Is everything going to be core?
Mr. Robertson?
Well, as a member,
Robertson, excuse me.
Well, as a current member of the legislature, I can answer that back, because I think the way the legislature need to respond to these new issues like the Common Core, and this is something that's relatively new and I'm just learning about, we need to listen to the experts, and the experts are your local superintendents and your school board. There's very few educators that are members of the legislature. Most of them are businessmen, attorneys, doctors. That the Florida legislature, and there's 120 of us in the Florida House, 40 senators. It's a very diverse, legislature, and there's very few educators that are members. So, from my perspective, as we transition and try to move to better student performance, better teacher pay and everything, that we need to listen to the people who are in the trenches, and that's the local school board and the administrators and our superintendents in the 67 counties in Florida.
Well, let's listen to our local superintendent. Dr. Whitaker, what do you see that the Florida legislature how should they respond to the significant issues surrounding the rollout of the Common Core state standards? Briefly.
Simplistically, I would say we need more money for training. That's not going to happen. You know, we understand the financial situation the state is in. Without additional money to move 1,100 teachers through the kind of training they're really going to need to teach differently, and it's hard to describe what the core does, but let me just give a shot.
Sure.
A national study a couple of years ago brought 100 teachers together to look at what are you teaching, brought their state curriculum. And those teachers were charged with this task. Look at what you're teaching and calculate how long it takes to teach that successfully one time. And so the teachers gathered, and all they looked at was language arts, math, science, and social studies, and the K-12 curriculum. And they spent 2 summers working on this with Bill Daggett and Bob Marzano. Added up at the end, they said if we taught everything in this curriculum successfully based on our experience one time, taught it once successfully, it would take 15,500 plus hours to cover this. The amount of time our children are in school, 180 days, 5.5 hours a day, nationally, I will tell you that's used to be the longest school year in the world. It's now the shortest school year in the world. But that's how much time we have. That converts to about 9,650 hours. So based on that one study, we have to teach 15,500 hours of curriculum in 9,650 hours. Only if we taught 4 things. That's the problem with the U.S. curriculum. The international organization that sends out the NAEP, the big international study that you read about where we're lagging behind, they conducted their own study and asked the question, why does the United States do so poorly? They answered their own question when they did the analysis, and they said, because you're trying to teach too much. And so you try to teach all of this stuff when all they really need to know is this. And in a nutshell, what the core does is it takes our curriculum from here to here. And rather than try to teach everything and kids just get a smattering, we're going to try to teach less at a more in-depth level. Depth of knowledge is now where we're trying to go. Converting to reading, one of the problems we have in Florida, one of the fallouts of high-stakes reading testing, you start to get kids, if the reading test is what I'm going to be held accountable for, I'm going to get kids ready for this. And what the reading experts have now told us is we've started to teach our kids to skim and scan. Now, most of us, when we learn to read, We'd read, and we'd play like a movie in our head if we were reading a novel. We knew what the characters would look like, and we followed the plot, and we got into it. Well, now, we'll give a student a book, and the first thing they want to know is, what are the questions going to be? What's going to be on the test? Well, here's what it's going to be. So they learn to skim the text, get a basic idea of what it is, go to the questions, read the questions, come back and scan the text for the answers, and they get the answers right. And then you say to the child, Andrea, can you tell me what you just read? And what does that mean to you? And the student will go, I don't know, but I got the questions right. So the core really focuses on depth of knowledge, and I'm sorry, that was supposed to be a short answer,
I appreciate
and it wasn't.
No, thank you. We made a pledge to get people out at 8 o'clock, and I'm committed to that. So I'm going to give each of you a final minute, minute and a half for some concluding thoughts. We'll start with Representative Robertson.
Well, thank you, Andrea. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for inviting me. And it's glad to see so many people out this evening to discuss education, because it is a very important topic in the state. Florida spends, almost a third of its budget on education, and it's really important. And one of the things that I find heartening is hearing from members of the community. This past summer, I've had several teachers actually come visit me in my office and tell me what it's like being in the classroom. So I think we all want the same thing. It's just a matter of how we get there. And I think it's important that we keep the dialogue open. I will compliment Dr. Whitaker and Lee Swift and members of the local school board. They've been very active in coming to Tallahassee and making their case. And that's one of the things I tell everybody. If you have an issue before the legislature, you need to get to know your local legislator and get involved. The Florida legislature is probably one of the most transparent legislatures in the country. You can view everything online. Most all the committee meetings are webcast live, or you can pull them up and look at them later. So I tell people, get engaged if you have an issue, and education is certainly a big one. Your legislature needs to hear from you. Charlotte County is going to have one member of the House, which will be myself, and we'll have 3 senators. So once the senators are elected, get to know them and make your thoughts known. So again, thank you for being here, and it was a pleasure to be with you all this evening.
We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be with us. Thank you. Ms. Jordan.
As well, I'd like to thank all of you too. And coming here today, I've learned a lot. Thank you for the core explanation. I hope that's the way it works, because I was visualizing that whole scamming or going through everything and knowing the answers. But I do want to thank you. I am here for you. I got into this race because of the fact that I do believe and I want to be a voice for our local people. Education is definitely very strong in my heart because of all my kids and the other kids that are out there, and they are our future. And I just want to make sure that we all have a future. So we need to emphasize on education and making sure that the money stays here, it goes into the public schools, the teachers have what they need, and we are there to support them, as well as the families. We need to get the families back involved into the school systems, because we can't expect you all to be there to teach our children and send them home and they're supposed to know everything. We must stay engaged with the school system, and we need to make sure that we emphasize that. And again, thank you.
Thank you for coming out tonight. Ms. House.
Well, it would be a very exciting time to be at the Senate, and I'm telling you, I'd really love to be there to help make sure that we really do all want the same thing, which is the best thing for our students. What I'm afraid is that as some of the figures that Mr. Swift showed us, that there's a lot of money involved in education, and there are some forces out there that would like to get that money. And I think we saw that Amendment 8 is quite a significant effort to get a hold of some of our tax dollars and put it at a place that we may not want it to go. And I'm afraid that the voucher system is the same thing, a real attempt to get some of those big dollars that we're spending in education, because it's all of us, and put those in private people's pockets and make a profit on it. And I'm so against that. And if I am your legislator, I will make sure that your tax dollar doesn't go to special interests and private interests, but goes to the welfare of the students in the state of Florida. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out tonight. Mr. Swift, you have about 30 seconds on the amendments that you'd like to tell us?
No.
30 seconds?
Yeah, I'm going to ignore her for only about the 4 millionth time. 2 things. One, I'm doing a forum on October the 15th at the Congregational United Church of Christ on Amendment 8 in much more detail than what I was able to compact into tonight. And it will be able to take questions throughout the forum. The church is on Aquí Está, just as you get into Punta Gorda Isles. Secondly, the League of Women Voters has actually recommended a vote no on all amendments. I would encourage you to go to the League of Women Voters website. There is some significant information there about the amendments, as well as some statistics on where Florida ranks in a number of different funding categories. And lastly, the School Boards Association has been castigated a little bit recently for its position on high-stakes testing, mostly by people who had never read the amendment, because if they, or our resolution, because if they'd read the resolution, they wouldn't have said the things that they did say. The Florida School Boards Association took a position against high-stakes testing, but not against accountability. One of the biggest problems with the FCAT, and one of the problems that we have shared with the governor on the test that's going to be associated with the Common Core, is that there is a lack of trust in the test itself. There have been so many scoring problems with the FCAT over the years, and the same people are designing the new test. Is called the PARCC, P-A-R-C-C, is designed in part by the same people, Pearson Learning. So the questions are going to be there. I think many of the accountability issues would disappear if people trusted the test, if they felt like the test was actually measuring what it's meant to measure in a fair and honest manner.
Thank you. I think you can see Mr. Swift is a wealth of knowledge. We appreciate your information. We're going to have a few remarks from Dr. Whitaker, and then Delta Kappa Gamma President Joanne Higgins is going to close us out for this evening. Dr. Whitaker.
I would like to thank you all for being here. I'm pleased with the turnout tonight. I want you to know, if you live here in Charlotte County, and I'm guessing most of you do, that in my 41 years of being in this profession, I know that's shocking, but in my 41 years of being in this profession, I have never worked in a place that had better teachers than Charlotte County. Our teachers are professional, they're dedicated, they work extremely hard under some very, very difficult situations. These budget cuts have really affected them personally, and yet every day they rise above it and go into their classrooms, and they just do a terrific job. And so if you know a teacher, hug them. If you haven't been in our schools, go visit. You will absolutely be amazed. And that's not an overstatement. You will absolutely be amazed at what you see. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins, according to my clock, you have 35 seconds.
I want to thank everyone. It's been a wonderful evening. I do appreciate, we all appreciate your time and effort. So thank you to Andrea Messina, our superintendent, Dr. Whitaker, and our schoolroom member, Lee Swift. Thank you so much for your time and preparing for this conversation. To our candidates, Debbie Jordan and Paula House, thank you. And good luck for the upcoming election.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
Robertson, thank you again for being our representative in Tallahassee. We appreciate all of your time and to take time out to answer our questions. To the audience, thanks for being a part of this. And the rose that we are giving out as appreciation is really a symbol for Delta Kappa Gamma, for what we do and what we stand for, beauty and success. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Beauty and success.